Shalom and welcome to another episode of Faith Journeys with God in the Land. And welcome to a beautiful sunrise here on the Sea of Galilee. So the sun is coming up on the Sea of Galilee. Good morning for this new episode, and I want to highlight this lake. It's called the Sea of Galilee in the Bible, and yet I want you to simply enjoy the beauty of this lake and not really look at me. So I'm going to turn the camera around and highlight what we're seeing. So this lake is mentioned, of course, in the Gospels. It's the primary area where Jesus did minister for a few years. His home base, if you will, for his Galilean ministry was Capernaum, a little further north on this shoreline. The sun is rising over the Golan Heights today. This lake that is 13 miles long and about 7 at its widest point at the northwest corner. Now the beauty of this lake is that it's freshwater and it's fed by 3 tributaries in the north. This would be the Bonias Spring, the Dan Spring, and the Hotspani Spring. There are a number of passages that help us remember what happened around this lake. In fact, probably for this short devotion, probably too many to list. But Matthew 4, for instance, tells us that Jesus was walking along the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee and he sees 4 fishermen. Initially Peter and Andrew, and then James and John. And he says, "Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." There are other passages like Mark 4 where Jesus is going out on a boat with his disciples and a storm arises quickly. Now, the elevation of this lake is close to 700 feet below sea level. So with the hills around it and the winds coming through the valleys, such as the Valley of the Doves by the cliffs of Arbel, what can easily happen are wind currents. And of course, the rain comes from the west. And when this westerly wind blows, it can stir up the water without warning. The same thing with an eastern wind. Now, an eastern wind here in Israel comes about a dozen times a year over this lake. The fishermen call it the Sharkia wind. And when that happens, of course, the waves crash along this shoreline. It's quite gentle this morning, of course. But Mark 4 is when Jesus is out in the boat on this body of water and a storm arises. And Jesus is sleeping. And the disciples wake him up and say, "Master, don't you care if we drowned?" What a question. These seasoned fishermen were concerned for their lives, and yet Jesus gets up and says, "Peace, be still." Can you picture it? They no doubt were facing a sharkia or eastern wind because they were heading to the other side, as Mark 5 tells us eventually. And then another story happens. It's recorded in Matthew 14, where just after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus makes his disciples get into a boat, and he waits until almost dawn, and then he comes walking towards them. And it's Peter who gets out of the boat. Of course, his eyes are on Jesus at first, but then he falls away, literally sinks. Jesus extends his hand of help and rescues him. Later on, after the resurrection, the disciples are fishing in their boat, and Jesus comes on the shoreline, if you remember from John 21. Just as one more example of the activity that took place here involving Jesus on the lake. And they see Jesus, and they come back to the shoreline, and this is the occasion when Jesus asks them, "Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me?" 3 times. Jesus was preparing them for what would soon to follow when they would go back to Jerusalem and Jesus would ascend to heaven, leaving the tasks of the kingdom in their now capable hands. So the Sea of Galilee really helps us remember the importance of following Jesus, trusting him, and serving him in his kingdom. All around this lake were Jewish towns and villages, and Jesus served the masses. He served individuals. And I have to think that he, as the scriptures, as the Gospels tell us, he, on occasion, I'm sure, got up early to pray. And what a view he would have had. This is the same sunrise that Jesus would have seen 2,000 years ago. So we appreciate the opportunity to be here on the shoreline of Nafginisar, looking at this beautiful sunrise across the lake. So in your faith walk today, make sure that you perhaps get up and pray. Maybe it will be early. Maybe it'll be watching a sunrise. But make sure that prayer is a part of your day today. Prayer is what connects us to God and really reveals our need for him. And remember also, if the Spirit tells you and prompts you to serve him, remember it's along the same shoreline where Jesus said to his disciples and initially called them, "Come follow me." The faith journey with God in the land involves following him wherever he may lead. So shalom from the beautiful shoreline of the Sea of Galilee here in northern Israel. Be encouraged today, and until next time, shalom.